It started with a whisper, one that I wasn't supposed to hear. "Doctor, Foster had just finished my checkup, same as every month," but when she leaned closer, her hand trembled. She slipped a small folded note into my coat pocket and said quietly, "Don't go home tonight, please, just trust me." I didn't understand. I'd known her for 20 years. She delivered my son, for God's sake. Why would she say something like that? As I walked out of that office, the paper felt heavier than my wallet. The air outside tasted strange, like rain and metal. Something deep inside me, that quiet voice you learn to listen to when you get older, told me this wasn't a joke. That night I found out why. And the truth, it didn't just break my heart. It broke the meaning of home. Before I tell you what happened, let me say this. If you've ever felt that something wasn't right, even with the people closest to you, trust that instinct. And if stories like this remind you how fragile love and loyalty can be, then stay with me. Go ahead, subscribe, like, or share this video so more people remember what family is supposed to mean. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because sometimes the warning you never expect comes from the person who still cares the most. Now, let me tell you what was waiting for me when I went home that night. It started out like any other Thursday. The rain hadn't shown up yet, but you could smell it in the Portland air. I was sitting in Dr. Foster's tiny office, same as I had for years, the kind of place that still had magazines from 2015 on the table. I'd been her patient for 2 decades, long enough that she knew when I was pretending to be fine. We joked a little, like always. She said, "Still fixing things around the house, Henry?" And I said, "Well, the house keeps breaking, so I keep fixing." That's what a lifetime of carpentry does to you. You measure your worth by what you can still repair. When the checkup was done, she stood up and smiled, but there was something in her eyes that didn't match her smile. As I reached for my coat, she leaned closer, voice low, and slipped a folded note into my pocket. "Don't go home tonight," she whispered. "Just trust me." For a second, I thought I misheard her. I even laughed, but she didn't. She just squeezed my shoulder, hard enough to make sure I understood. Then she walked away like nothing happened. I drove out of the parking lot with that note burning a hole through my jacket. The streets looked different, quieter, heavier somehow. My hands shook on the wheel. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she meant something else. But deep down, something inside me had already started to tighten. Halfway home, my phone rang. It was Ethan, my son. We hadn't talked much lately, at least not like we used to. His voice was calm, too calm. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Don't bother cooking dinner tonight. We've got something to talk about." That's all he said. No "how are you," no "love you," just that. When I hung up, the silence in the truck felt alive. I could hear my own breathing, the wipers squeaking against dry glass. I kept replaying his words and the doctor's whisper over and over. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was low, that soft golden hour where everything looks beautiful but feels fragile. I sat there for a while, engine off, staring at the house I'd built with my own hands 40 years ago. Every nail, every plank, every bit of it had a story. My wife and I used to say the walls remembered laughter. Lately, I wondered what else they remembered. I almost walked inside, I really did, but something stopped me. I could see shadows moving through the curtain. Ethan and his wife, Lauren. They were talking, but not in the way families talk, more like whispering, scheming. I backed away before they saw me, heart pounding like I'd just done something wrong. My feet led me down the street, past the mailbox, past the fence I built for Ethan when he was 12. I ended up under the streetlight at the corner, the one that always flickered but never went out. That's where I finally pulled out the note. The paper was soft from her perfume. Just a few words written in quick, careful handwriting. "They've been asking about your prescriptions. Someone wants you confused." I read it twice, then a third time, my hands shaking. It didn't make sense, not until I remembered how Ethan had been asking about my medication last week. "Just making sure you're taking the right stuff, Dad," he said. He even offered to pick them up for me next time. My stomach turned cold. I thought about every small thing that hadn't felt right lately. The missing pill bottles, the funny taste in my tea, the way Lauren always smiled too wide when I said I was tired. The rain finally came, soft and slow, tapping against the note in my hand. I folded it carefully, slipped it back into my pocket, and looked up at the house. The porch light flickered just like it always did, but for the first time it didn't feel like home. I whispered to myself, "What are you doing, Ethan?" I didn't have the answer, but I knew one thing: I couldn't walk through that door tonight. Something was waiting for me inside, and it wasn't love. So I turned away. Took one last look at the house I built, the family I thought I knew, and walked into the rain with nothing but that note in my pocket. Some stories don't start with a fight or a lie. Sometimes they start with a whisper, one you can't ignore. And before this story goes any further, if you've ever felt something was off in your own home, don't shrug it off. Sometimes silence hides the loudest danger. Stay with me, this is where everything changed. When I pulled up to the house that night, the rain had already started to fall, that slow, steady kind that makes everything quiet. The porch light was on, same as always, but for some reason I didn't go straight in. Something told me to wait. Through the crack in the window, I could see the kitchen light glowing warm and yellow. Ethan and Lauren were sitting at the table, glasses of wine in front of them. They were talking softly, almost whispering, but the sound carried just enough through the rain. Lauren said, "He'll sign the power of attorney soon, just a few more days." Ethan laughed, a sound I hadn't heard since he was a kid, only this one didn't sound innocent. Then she added, "Just hide his medication for a bit. He's been forgetful anyway, it'll make sense." I froze. I couldn't breathe. My son's voice, the same boy I taught to hold a hammer, was now planning how to take everything from me. There was a soft clink of glasses, a toast, like it was some kind of victory. My hand tightened around the doorknob, but I didn't push it open. I stood there in the rain, watching shadows move across the kitchen walls. I could hear their laughter mix with the storm. That sound, it hit harder than any word could. For years, I believed the worst thing about getting old was losing strength. Turns out it's being treated like you already have. I thought about the times I helped him pay off debts, fixed his roof, gave him the house keys when he lost his own. Every nail I drove into this home was supposed to hold our family together. But now, every echo of laughter felt like a nail driven through my chest. They think I'm already fading. I whispered it to myself. Saying it out loud made it hurt more. I stepped back into the darkness, letting the rain wash down my face so it could hide the tears. I didn't want to believe what I heard. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they were talking about someone else. But deep down, I knew. The way Lauren smiled lately, the way Ethan spoke to me like I was some old fool who should be grateful for a chair by the window, it all made sense now. They were planning to make me disappear one pill at a time. I looked through that window one last time. Ethan was pouring more wine, grinning like he'd already won. Lauren touched his arm, leaned in, whispered something that made them both laugh. The kind of laugh that people make when they think no one's listening, cruel, careless, comfortable. The house I built, the same one that held birthday candles, Christmas dinners, my wife's last breath, now felt like enemy ground. My whole life I believed in fixing things. You break a chair, you mend it. You break a door, you sand it down and hang it back up. But this wasn't something I could fix with wood or nails. For the first time I felt old. Not because my hands shook, but because I realized how little they thought of me. How quickly love turns into convenience when money's involved. Lightning cracked across the sky, and for a second the whole yard lit up. My reflection stared back at me through the window, gray hair soaked, eyes hollow, shoulders heavy. I barely recognized myself. But right then something changed. The sadness turned into something sharper, quieter, a promise. I took a deep breath, closed my hand into a fist, and whispered under my breath, "No one decides my ending but me." Then I turned away from the house. My boots sank into the mud as I walked down the driveway, rain still pouring, thunder rolling somewhere far off. Each step felt heavier, but clearer too, like I was walking out of a fog I didn't know I'd been in for years. Behind me, the lights of the kitchen still glowed warm and soft. But that warmth wasn't mine anymore. People think betrayal comes with shouting and slammed doors. But sometimes it comes with a quiet laugh behind a closed curtain when they think you're too old to hear. I wasn't going to confront them that night. I wasn't ready, not yet. But I knew one thing for sure: whatever they were planning, whatever they thought I'd become, they were about to learn I wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there in my truck, watching the rain slide down the windshield, wondering how long it had been since my own home stopped feeling like mine. By morning, the storm had passed, but the air still smelled like wet pine and betrayal. I drove straight to the old workshop, the one behind the school where I used to teach kids how to build birdhouses. The place hadn't changed much. Dust on the benches, sawdust still clinging to the corners. My name was still carved into the worktable crooked letters from a younger man who thought he had all the time in the world. I pulled open the bottom drawer, the one I'd locked 20 years ago with a tiny brass key. Inside was a wooden box, plain, worn, but solid. The hinges creaked when I lifted the lid, and there it was, the ledger. A beat-up notebook with coffee stains and pencil marks all over the cover. I hadn't touched it since the day my wife passed. Her handwriting was the first thing I saw, neat, careful, still carrying that calm she always had. On the inside cover she'd written, "Build, not just for them, build for truth." I remember the day she said that. I'd been worried about money, about the house, about the kids. She just smiled and said, "Henry, the things we build with love last longer than anything money can buy." I guess she was right. Love outlasts everything, even betrayal. I flipped through the pages. Receipts, property deeds, insurance documents, old letters from clients. And then near the back, tucked between two blank pages, the one thing that made my heart stop, a set of account numbers and legal papers. The Cole Family Trust. It wasn't much to look at, just some signatures and seals, but I knew what it meant. That trust was my wife's idea. She made me move everything into it years ago, just in case, she said. At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious. Turns out she was protecting me from my own blood. There it was, $1, $8 million in savings, tied up so tight that not even I could touch it unless I proved I was of sound mind. A test of sanity. I almost laughed at the irony. The very thing they were trying to take from me, my mind, was now the key to everything they wanted. I sat there for a long time, staring at the pages. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. All my life, people saw me as the man who built things for others, their homes, their fences, their tables. But no one ever asked what I built for myself. And now, sitting in that workshop, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and oil, I realized this ledger was my blueprint for survival. I ran my fingers along the cover, whispered to the empty room, "You still here, Mary?" Silence, just the hum of the old fluorescent light above. Then I said it out loud, for myself as much as for her. "If they want a weak man, they'll meet a builder." The words hit different when you say them alone. They feel heavier, truer. I tucked the ledger back into the box, locked it, and slid it under the bench. For the first time in years, I felt a plan forming, not out of anger but out of purpose. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to beg. They thought they could write me off like an old piece of furniture, useful once, now in the way. But I'd spent my whole life fixing broken things. And if my family was broken now, then maybe it was time I fixed that too, not with forgiveness yet, but with truth. As I turned to leave, I looked around the shop one last time. Every nail, every dent in the table, every scar on my hands, they were proof that I built something real. And for the first time since that doctor's note, I stood a little straighter. I stepped outside, the sun breaking through gray clouds, the puddles glowing with light. It felt like Mary was there, somewhere in that morning breeze, whispering, "Good, that's the man I married." And maybe she was right again, because I wasn't done building, not yet. The next morning, the sun came up pale and tired, like it didn't want to see what the day was about to bring. I packed light, just my wallet, the old truck keys, and a tiny recorder I hadn't used in years. The kind that still clicks when you press record. I didn't even bother with breakfast. I just needed to move before fear could catch up to me. The road into town was quiet. Wet asphalt, soft mist rising from the fields. I kept replaying last night in my head, their voices, their laughter. Every word felt heavier with daylight. By the time I parked in front of Carter and Associates, my hands had stopped shaking. MS. Carter's office was small but bright. Books stacked in neat rows, the smell of coffee and printer ink filling the air. When she saw me step through the door, her eyes widened. "Mr. Cole," she said, standing up. "It's been, what, 20 years?" 22, I said, smiling for the first time in days. "You used to sand wood in my shop after class. You made that crooked chair your mom still refuses to throw away." She laughed, but her smile faded when she saw the look on my face. What's wrong? I handed her the doctor's note. She read it once, then looked back at me, brows furrowed. Who's been asking about your prescriptions? My son, his wife, maybe both, I said quietly. They're trying to make me look confused, forgetful, just long enough to sign a few papers I shouldn't. She leaned back, crossing her arms. Power of attorney. I nodded. She exhaled through her nose. Mr. Cole, they're trying to declare you mentally unfit. That gives them control of everything, your property, your finances, your decisions. You'd be alive, but legally silent. Her words stung, not because I didn't know, but because hearing it said out loud made it real. Then she added softly, but you built this town. You trained half the carpenters who work here now. Your mind's still sharper than their greed. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Not the kind that comes from humor, but from the relief of being seen. Then let's give them a lesson they'll never forget. She smiled, that kind of slow, knowing smile that only people who have seen a few storms can manage. All right, she said. We'll start by protecting what's yours. She laid out a stack of documents, fresh legal papers, a new power of attorney that reversed everything, one that put control back where it belonged, under my name. I signed each page slowly, steady hand, clear eyes. My signature looked older but strong. Then she said, we'll also update your medical file, make sure no one can access or change your prescriptions without your direct consent. I looked at her. You think they'll notice? Oh, they will, she said, but by the time they do, it'll be too late. For the first time in days, I felt the tightness in my chest ease. The fear didn't vanish, but it started to turn into something else, focus. I pulled the tiny recorder from my pocket and placed it on her desk. Can you teach me how to make this admissible evidence? She raised an eyebrow. Planning something, Mr. Cole? I smiled. Just documenting history. She chuckled, shaking her head. Wisdom doesn't retire, does it? No, I said, standing up. But sometimes it wakes up late. I left her office feeling 10 years younger. The air outside was crisp, the sky clearing. The town looked different now, not smaller, just quieter. I could almost hear Mary's voice in my head, the way she used to say, if you ever feel small, Henry, build something bigger. So that's what I decided to do. Not with wood this time, but with truth. I spent the rest of the day setting things in motion. Called the bank. Closed access to joint accounts. Moved what I could under the trust. Made copies of everything, receipts, messages, medical records. Each piece of paper felt like one more nail in the frame of something solid. By evening, I sat in the truck again, the recorder in my pocket, my hands no longer trembling. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Wrinkles, gray hair, tired eyes, but behind them, the man who built homes, fixed doors, and raised a family was still there. Maybe they thought age made me weak. Maybe they thought time made me blind. But they forgot one thing: builders don't crumble, they rebuild. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, I whispered to myself, all right then, let's begin. The next few days moved slow, like time itself was holding its breath. MS. Carter worked quietly behind the scenes, never calling unless she had something solid. I kept my head down, played the part of the forgetful old man they thought I was. Let them think they were winning. Then one afternoon, the phone rang. Carter's voice was steady, but I could hear the edge underneath. Henry, we found something. She explained that her investigator had dug through the family's financial activity. Lauren had opened 2 credit cards in my name, one tied to the old utility account, another hidden under Cole Home Maintenance. She'd been pulling money from my retirement fund for months, using fake signatures, transferring small amounts so the bank wouldn't notice. Smart, I said quietly. She knew how to steal just below suspicion. Carter sighed. She's not as smart as she thinks. We've got the proof. I thanked her and hung up, staring at the framed photo on my desk, me, Ethan, and Mary, taken the year we finished the house. My wife's eyes were bright even then. Build for truth, she used to say. I wondered what she'd think now. That night I took out the small recorder again, the one I'd carried to Carter's office. I clicked it on, tucked it under the hallway table, and waited. Around 9, I heard them come home. Keys jingling, shoes kicking off, laughter, the easy kind people share when they think the world's asleep. I sat in my chair, pretending to watch TV, eyes half closed. Ethan's voice floated in from the kitchen. He signed those new papers too easily. It's almost scary how out of it he is. Lauren laughed. Yeah, well, if he forgets something, we'll just remind him we're helping. Once the transfer's done, we can move him into Meadowview. My cousin works there, she'll make sure he stays medicated. Medicated? Ethan asked. She clinked her glass against his. You know what I mean, calm, quiet, out of the way. The words were cold like nails through wood. I stayed still, not breathing until they went upstairs. Then I clicked the recorder off. The next morning, I walked across the street to see my neighbor, old Mr. Miller. We'd worked on the same construction crew 40 years ago. He was sitting on his porch, coffee steaming, radio humming low. He looked up when he saw me. Henry Cole, well, I'll be damned, haven't seen you since you fixed my fence. I smiled. Yeah, it's been a while. We sat for a minute listening to the morning birds. Then I said quietly, you ever feel like the world forgets what you've built? He nodded slowly, every day. Then he gave me that sharp look old men share when they've been through the same storms. They forget who built those doors they're slamming, Henry. I laughed under my breath. Yeah, they sure do. I left his porch feeling lighter, strangely calm, not angry, just clear. When I got home, I stood in front of the mirror. The man looking back at me didn't feel like me anymore, tired eyes, gray beard, shirt half-buttoned. I'd let them see a ghost when I was still alive, so I shaved. The sound of the razor filled the silence, steady, deliberate. Each stroke peeled away the fear, the hesitation. When I was done, I looked older but stronger, more myself. Then I opened the closet and pulled out the navy blue vest Mary had given me for our 20th anniversary. It still smelled faintly of cedar. I buttoned it up, straightened the collar, and stared at the reflection one last time. A man can rebuild anything, I said quietly, even respect. I packed a small bag, recorder, documents, copies of the trust papers, and sat by the window. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters. The world always feels like it's about to break right before something changes. For the first time in weeks, I felt steady. The fear that used to wake me up at night was gone. In its place, something new, a plan, a purpose. They wanted me confused, they wanted me quiet. But I'd spent a lifetime building things from nothing, houses from empty lots, furniture from scrap wood, hope from grief. I knew how to start over. I knew how to measure twice and cut once. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about dignity, about proving that wisdom doesn't retire, it just learns how to speak softer and hit harder. As the sun set behind the trees, I turned the recorder back on, testing the sound. Let's begin, I said softly, my voice low but steady. The calm before the storm had arrived, and this time I was ready for it. The trap was set on a Thursday morning. The air was cold and clean, one of those days where the sunlight feels too honest. Carter called me the night before and said, everything's ready. They'll come to the notary's office at 10. I barely slept. I spent most of the night walking through the house, touching the things I'd built, the door frames, the shelves, the dining table. Every inch of wood told a story. And tomorrow, my own son was going to try to sell it like a used car. By 10 sharp, I was standing in the back office of Cole and Pierce Realty, hidden behind a frosted glass divider. Carter stood out front, pretending to review documents. The notary, a good man named Thomas, was in on it too. He looked nervous, kept glancing at the door. Then they came in. Ethan in his press suit, Lauren right beside him, sunglasses on even indoors. She was smiling, that polished, practiced kind of smile people wear when they think they've already won. Ethan handed Carter a manila folder. These are the final papers, he said. Dad's agreed to transfer the property, we just need to sign. Carter nodded, flipping through the papers slowly, buying time. You're selling the property on Lakeview Drive. Lauren chimed in too casually. Yes. My father-in-law decided it's too much for him to manage. We're helping him transition. Carter raised an eyebrow, and Mr. Cole couldn't be here today. Lauren's smile faltered. He's resting, he's not well. That's when I stepped out. My footsteps echoed on the tile, slow and deliberate. The room went still. Ethan turned first, his face draining of color. I stopped a few feet away and said, calm as I could, before you sell my home, maybe you should prove I'm not in my right mind. You could have heard a pin drop. Lauren froze, mouth half open. Ethan stammered, Dad, what are you doing here? Watching, I said. Something I should have done a long time ago. Carter set the folder down, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small speaker. She pressed play. At first, all you could hear was the faint hum of background noise, the sound of dishes clinking, the murmur of voices. Then, clear as day, Lauren's voice. Just hide his medication. He's been forgetful anyway. Once the transfer's done, we can move him into Meadowview. Gasps filled the room. Even the notary leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. Ethan took a step forward. "Dad, it's not what it sounds like." I looked at him, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to follow me around the workshop, asking how to make the perfect cut. But that boy was gone. "No," I said quietly. "You can explain or you can remember." He blinked, confused. "Remember what?" I took a deep breath. "That I built you a home. I gave you everything. And somewhere along the way, you decided that wasn't enough." Carter turned off the recording. The silence afterward was louder than any shout. The door to the office opened suddenly. 2 reporters from the local paper stepped in, cameras ready. Carter had tipped them off earlier. They'd been covering elder fraud cases all month. The flash went off. One of them asked, "Mr. Cole, is it true your own son tried to sell your house without your consent?" Ethan's voice cracked. "This isn't what it looks like." I looked straight at the reporter. "It's exactly what it looks like, but it's also what happens when people forget that age doesn't erase ownership or memory." The reporter nodded slowly, and I could tell this would be on tomorrow's front page. Elderly man exposes legal fraud by his own son. Ethan's hands trembled. "Dad, please, we can fix this." Lauren tried to reach for his arm, but he pulled away, eyes glassy, jaw tight. For the first time, he looked small, not because of his age, but because of what he'd become. I turned to Carter. "You have everything you need." She nodded. "Every document, every recording. They won't be able to touch a cent." I looked back at Ethan. "I don't hate you, son, but this house, it's more than walls. It's what's left of your mother, of me, of who we were supposed to be." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Lauren muttered something under her breath, an excuse maybe, but no one was listening. The notary stood up, straightened his tie, and said, "I'm going to have to report this. This is forgery." Carter added quietly, "You should both call your lawyers." They left without another word. The sound of their footsteps faded down the hallway, sharp and hollow. When the door closed, I finally exhaled. The tension I'd been carrying for weeks, maybe years, drained out of me. Carter smiled softly. "You did good, Mr. Cole." I shook my head. "No, I just stopped pretending I was weak." Outside, the sky had turned gold. The reporters lingered near the parking lot, snapping a few last photos. I stood there for a moment, feeling the warmth on my face. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an old man fighting to be heard. I felt like someone who remembered who he was and refused to let anyone else rewrite his story. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just walks in quietly and turns on the light. The courtroom was packed. You could feel the air tighten with every breath, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Reporters filled the benches, pens clicking, cameras ready. The sign outside read State vs. Ethan Cole, but to me it felt like father vs. son. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded, the same way I used to when waiting for the glue to dry on a piece of wood, patient, steady, but praying it would hold. Ethan sat across from me, head down, suit too big on him, eyes hollow. Lauren looked brittle, her hands twisting in her lap. When the bailiff called for order, I didn't look at them. I looked straight ahead at the jury. Ordinary people, teachers, electricians, parents. Folks who still believed in right and wrong, folks like me. The prosecutor began laying out the evidence, the forged documents, the stolen money, the recordings. My voice echoed in the audio, the same one Carter had played weeks ago in that office. It was strange hearing myself, older but clear, talking about truth. Then they called Sarah. She was shaking when she stood. My granddaughter, just 20, wearing her mother's old coat, eyes red from crying. She looked at me once, then turned to the judge. "My mom told me to do it," she said softly. "She said Grandpa wouldn't notice. She made me sign his name on the power of attorney form. I didn't understand what it meant then. I just wanted them to stop fighting." Her voice cracked. But when I saw the news, when I realized what they'd done, I knew I had to tell the truth. The room went silent. Even the judge, a stern woman with glasses low on her nose, took a long pause before nodding gently. "Thank you, Miss Cole." Ethan covered his face with his hands. I wanted to reach out, tell him it was okay, but it wasn't. Some things you can't fix with an apology or a hug. Some things you have to face head on. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. My legs felt heavier than they had in years. I didn't look at Ethan. I couldn't. I just looked at the jury, at the faces that reminded me of every honest day I ever worked. They tried to steal my memory, I said quietly, but I remember every nail I drove into that house and every promise I made to love, not to own. I saw a few people nod. Someone in the back wiped their eyes. I went on. I built a home so my family would have a place to feel safe. I never thought the walls I built to keep out the cold would one day hold so much silence, but here we are. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, do you have anything else to add before we proceed?" I shook my head. "Only that I hope my son remembers what I taught him, that a man's worth isn't in what he takes, but in what he builds." When the verdict came, it landed like thunder. Guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, financial abuse. The courtroom murmured, a ripple of shock and sorrow. Ethan's head dropped lower. Lauren gasped, covering her mouth. Sarah sobbed quietly, her face buried in her hands. The judge's voice was firm but not unkind. "Ethan Cole, 12 years in federal custody. Lauren Cole, 10 years probation and community service." The sound of the gavel echoed once, clean and final. I stayed seated as the bailiff led them away. Ethan didn't look back. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe I couldn't either. Carter leaned over, whispered, "It's over, Henry." I nodded slowly. "No," I said, voice quiet but sure. "It's done, but it's not over." When I finally stood, I turned toward the courtroom window. The morning light poured in through the blinds, soft and gold, cutting through the gray. Reporters called out questions, flashbulbs popped, but their voices blurred into static. I just kept walking. Every step echoed down the hallway, steady and hollow, like footsteps on an old wooden floor. Outside, I paused on the courthouse steps. The air smelled like rain, like the kind that washes dust off everything. Carter caught up beside me, her voice gentle. "Do you feel any better?" I looked out at the sky and said, "I built him a home. He built me a lesson." She frowned a little, like she didn't understand, but I did. Because sometimes justice doesn't feel like winning. It feels like remembering who you are when everything else has been stripped away. And as the wind picked up, brushing past my sleeve, I thought of Mary again. I could almost hear her whisper, "You did what was right, Henry. You didn't build a house. You built proof." I smiled, just barely. Then I walked down those courthouse steps, slower than before, but lighter, the kind of light that comes only when the truth finally stops hiding. A year passed. Seasons came and went like pages in a book I'd already read too many times. The house was quieter now, but not empty, never empty. Sarah moved in with me after the trial. She'd started studying law, said she wanted to protect people like you, Grandpa. I told her she already had. Every morning I made 2 cups of coffee out of habit. One for me, one for the memory of her grandmother. Then we'd head out to the workshop. The smell of sawdust and varnish still clung to the walls, same as it always had. Sarah wasn't much good with tools at first, too careful, too scared to make mistakes. But I told her what I told every kid who ever learned under me. Wood forgives if you work with patience. She laughed. "So it's like people." "Exactly like people," I said. Together, we started rebuilding an old table, the same one that used to sit in our dining room before everything fell apart. The one Ethan once slammed his hands on during a fight about money. The one I swore I'd never fix because it reminded me of that night. But Sarah wanted to. "We should finish what he started," she said softly. So we did. It took weeks, measuring, sanding, refitting each piece. Some parts were too damaged to reuse, so we replaced them with new wood, but we left the old cracks visible. "They tell the story," I told her. "Don't hide them, let them show." One afternoon, when the light hit just right through the shop window, the table finally stood on its own again. Smooth, solid, whole. Sarah ran her hand over the surface and smiled. "It's beautiful." I nodded, but I wasn't looking at the table. I was looking at her, her steady hands, her quiet determination. I saw a future that might just be okay. That night, after she went to bed, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. I'd been meaning to for months. The paper trembled a bit under my hand, but the words came easier than I thought they would. "I don't hate you, son, But I can't forget what greed made of us. Learn to build again, not with wood, but with humility. There's still time to make something good out of what's left. I paused before signing it. My name looks smaller now than it used to, softer somehow. Maybe that was a good thing. I sealed the letter, addressed it to the correctional facility. I didn't know if he'd read it or tear it up or laugh at it, but I sent it anyway. Because forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who refuses to carry the weight any longer. Later, I walked into the living room and stood in front of the old photograph on the mantel, me and Mary, the day we finished building this house. She had sawdust in her hair and the proudest smile you'd ever seen. For a long while, I just looked at her face, the kind of look that holds more memory than words. Then I whispered, "We finished the house, love." And I meant it, not just the one made of nails and beams, but the one inside me too, the one that had been cracked and hollow for so long. Sarah found me there a few minutes later, still staring at the photo. She slipped her arm through mine and said, "Grandma would have been proud." I smiled. Maybe she already is. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of fresh rain and pine from the hills, the same scent that used to drift in when Mary baked bread on Sundays. I opened the window, let it in. The night felt peaceful for the first time in years. Sarah called from the kitchen, "Grandpa, dinner's ready." I turned off the lamp, gave the photo one last nod, and said, "Coming." As I walked toward our table, I realized something simple. Life doesn't always give you back what you lost, but sometimes it gives you enough to start again. And that's what forgiveness really is. Not forgetting, not excusing, just building something stronger from what's still standing. People think getting older means you slow down, but it's not true. You just start hearing life differently. The noise fades and what's left, the important stuff, gets louder. I've spent most of my life building things. Tables, doors, fences, all meant to last. But somewhere along the way, I learned that the strongest things you build aren't made of wood. They're made of time, honesty, and love, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken every day to be real. Family isn't a right, it's a responsibility. We forget that sometimes. We treat it like something we're owed instead of something we're supposed to earn. I look at Sarah now, sanding down the edge of a table, her brow furrowed like mine used to be when I was her age. She's got that quiet focus, the same kind her grandmother had when she was painting the house blue, because she said, "Every home deserves a color that feels like hope." Sarah looks up and says, "Grandpa, how do you know when something's finished?" I tell her, "When it feels strong enough to hold what matters." She smiles, but I know she's thinking deeper than the wood in front of her. Wisdom doesn't retire, I say softly. Love doesn't fade. Only respect can die if we let it. It's strange standing here now, realizing how much of my life was spent teaching others how to build things, but forgetting to teach them what not to break. Sometimes I wonder if Ethan understands that yet. Maybe he does. Maybe prison gives you enough silence to hear your mistakes. Maybe that's where real learning happens, in the quiet, when there's no one left to blame. If you're blessed with an honest heart, protect it. And if you've hurt someone who raised you, make it right before it's too late. You can rebuild a house. You can replace a door, but you can't always rebuild time. Out in the yard, the afternoon light turns everything gold the way it does before sunset, when the air feels thick and forgiving. I pick up the old sign that used to hang above the workshop door. The paint's chipped, the edges splintered, but the name still shows through, Cole Carpentry. I grab a brush, dip it into the can of fresh paint Sarah mixed earlier, and add 3 new words under it, and granddaughter. When I hang it back up, the wood creaks, the bolts squeak, but it holds, just like me. Sarah steps out beside me, wiping her hands on a rag. She looks up at the sign and grins. "Looks good." "Yeah," I say, "it finally does." The wind picks up, carrying that faint smell of pine and sawdust, the same scent that filled my life for 50 years, the smell of work, of purpose, of something real. I glance at Sarah again and see more than a granddaughter. I see a continuation, proof that maybe I didn't fail completely. Proof that what we build with love doesn't end when we do. She hands me a cold lemonade, the kind her grandmother used to make, and says, "You ever miss building houses?" I shake my head. "No, these days I'm building people." She laughs, not realizing I mean it. As the sun dips lower, light filters through the dust in the air, tiny gold specks floating like memories you can almost touch. I sit back on the workbench, feeling the roughness of the wood under my palms, and for once I don't feel old. I just feel finished. Maybe that's what peace really is, when you stop wishing things had gone differently and you start being grateful they happened at all. Mary's photo still hangs above the desk. I catch her smile in the fading light and whisper, "You'd like this, love, you really would." Sarah starts sweeping the floor, humming something I can't quite place. The rhythm of the broom, the sound of her footsteps, it all blends into a quiet kind of music. The kind that doesn't demand attention but stays with you long after it stops. I look one last time at the sign swaying gently in the breeze, coal and granddaughter carpentry, and feel the weight of everything it took to earn those words. Maybe this is what legacy really means. Not what you leave behind, but who keeps carrying it forward. And as the camera pulls back, the golden light fading, sawdust dancing like tiny fireflies, I can almost hear my wife's voice again. "You built it, Henry. You built something that lasts." If you've made it this far, maybe this story hit something deep inside you, something you've seen, or maybe something you've lived through. Because the truth is, stories like Henry's aren't just fiction. They happen quietly every day behind closed doors, in homes that were built with love and end up filled with silence. If you've ever seen an elder treated unfairly, don't stay quiet. Don't scroll past it and think, that's someone else's problem, because it never starts with shouting or with stolen money. Betrayal doesn't begin with lies, it begins when we forget who built the foundation we're standing on. That's how it always starts, with forgetfulness. We forget the hands that held us when we were weak, the voices that taught us how to speak, the backs that bent so ours wouldn't have to. And one day, that forgetfulness turns into distance, then indifference, and before we know it, love becomes debt. So if you've ever looked at your parents or grandparents and thought, they'll always be there, take a second tonight to prove it. Call them. Visit. Listen to their stories. Because sometimes the only thing they need to feel alive again is to know they are not invisible. And if you've ever been that elder, the one who's been overlooked, doubted, or disrespected, hear this: you are not forgotten. Your worth didn't expire with age. The world may have gotten louder, faster, colder, but the wisdom you carry still matters. You built things that lasted. You raised people who learned from your hands. You are the reason someone out there still knows what love looks like. If this story made you feel something, anger, sadness, hope, share it. Not just for Henry, but for every father, mother, or grandparent who's ever been made to feel small in their own home. Share it to remind people that justice doesn't always happen in a courtroom. Sometimes it starts with awareness, with one person saying, "Enough." If you believe no father deserves this kind of betrayal, comment the word justice. Not for clicks, not for vanity, but to show that there are still people who care, still people who believe that dignity has no expiration date. Every comment, every share, every word adds another voice to the ones who can't speak for themselves anymore. And while you're at it, tell us where you're watching from, because family has no borders. Whether you're in Portland, Melbourne, Manila, or a small town no one's ever heard of, the truth is, love and respect sound the same in every language. Maybe that's the real power of stories like this. They don't just entertain us. They remind us that doing the right thing still matters, that it's never too late to make things right. That forgiveness, no matter how quiet, can rebuild what anger once broke. If you've ever helped someone older cross the street, or fixed something for a parent without being asked, or just said thank you to someone who raised you, you've already proven that goodness still exists. We just have to keep choosing it. So here's the thing: if you believe in compassion, in accountability, in honoring where you came from, don't let this story end with the credits. Hit that share button. Send it to someone who needs a reminder. Leave a comment for the people who built you.